Hey guys, welcome back. TJ here with Dead History. Welcome to part 2 of our look at the 27th President of the United States, William Howard Taft. Our next installment here of our presidential series. I welcome you. I thank you for joining us. Of course, as I said in part 1, I am flying solo for the audio portion of this installment. Henry's not with me for the audio. And to be completely honest with you guys, Henry loves doing the videos. He loves taking little road trips and seeing all these things and these sites, and he loves doing the videos. He's not a big fan of doing the audio. So usually I am tasked with that, but very understandable for a 7.5-year-old attention span, of course. However, I did want to just mention briefly before we jump into Taft, this is crazy. We're already at the 27th president. Now, as anybody knows, obviously, just to kind of make it clear, because I don't think I've really touched on this too much, we are not going to be doing videos on currently living former presidents. So, when it comes time, there will not, as of right now at least, there will not be a video on Jimmy Carter. There will not be a video on Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald J. Trump. There will not, and of course, Joe Biden. There will not be videos on them because the main purpose of our videos, as the name of our channel and everything indicates, Dead History, is really to be looking at, their grave sites and where they died, the place they died at, and that sort of thing, and mainly their grave sites, of course. So, since there is no grave sites of the living people, of course, we will not be doing those right now. Now, what I will tell you is, for example, someone like former President Jimmy Carter, who is, up there in age, as we all know, he's in his mid-90s, I will, when the day does come that President Carter passes away, I will do a video. However, I might wait until I have access to go to his gravesite. So it might be a while before I do a video on him. But just keep in mind that I will not really, I should will not do a video on those former presidents right as soon as they pass away, because I will wait until I can gain access to go visit their gravesite before I do a video. So please keep that in mind. Then, of course, after this, the presidential series, which, just so everybody knows, I calculated it out. I think it'll be ending sometime around mid-August, I believe. Sometime in that time frame, somewhere around there. We are going to move right on the very next week and start our vice presidential series. Last thing I will note before I move on to William Taft, because I know I'm being a little long-winded here. With the vice presidential series, we will not be covering presidents, vice presidents that became president, because we've already done them. So people like John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, and when we get to them, George H.W. Bush, people like that, we will not, Harry Truman, as you know, all these people that were vice president and then became president, we're already going to be doing videos on them in the presidential series. So we're not going to double up and talk about their vice presidency because it would be kind of, repetitious and redundant. So we're just going to simply do the vice presidents that never were president. We're just going to be doing it that way. So I hope, because I'm sure some of these questions were in people's minds. I've actually been asked this by a few people. So I hope that kind of clears up what the plan is moving forward for us here at Dead History. All right, now, our 27th President of the United States, William Howard Taft. Wonderful, wonderful, smart man. He was a pretty good man. Like I said, brilliant man. He really was a very, very smart guy. So let's jump right in and start talking about his presidency. I'm going to just kind of give you the overview, as I always do. That's usually my favorite way to do this. It seems to be the most effective. So here we go. Taft's dream was to be appointed to the Supreme Court. He hated the discord of politics. Taft was a great administrator. He was perfectly suited to be a Supreme Court justice, to listen to arguments, and to draw judgments. Teddy Roosevelt was a very persuasive man, and Taft was not a guy that was good at saying no. So Taft ends up in a position that he never really coveted, and no person should ever be president unless they covet the position. In the 1908 election, the Solid South, as it was known, which had voted exclusively Democratic ever since the end of Reconstruction, hoped the third time would be a charm for their candidate, William Jennings Bryan, a man who had lost twice to William McKinley. But Teddy Roosevelt's popularity carried over for the Republican Taft, even though during the campaign, some joked that Taft stood for "Take Advice from Theodore." So there you go. Taft, like I said, very good friends with Roosevelt. Roosevelt felt that Taft should be his successor, and he worked very hard on making that happen, and he did. 1908 election went to Taft. As you're seeing here, William Jennings Bryan, third time, struck out. 3 strikes and you're out, I guess. William Jennings Bryan, I mean, he was right there a few times. And yeah, unfortunately, he lost again to William Howard Taft in that 1908 election. Now, I have been, just a little side note, to William Jennings Bryan's gravesite, which is also in Arlington National Cemetery, same place as William Howard Taft's. However, I'm not going to show that just yet. The reason being is because I may in the future, I mean, it'll be a long time in the future, but I may do a presidential campaign loser series where I cover all of the people who ever ran for president but lost. So we might do that down the road. We shall see. So here we go. In 1909, as Taft took office as the 27th president, it became clear that he was very different from Teddy Roosevelt. He was a reluctant leader. He felt out of place in the White House. William Howard Taft called the mansion a prison, and he avoided his job whenever possible. William Taft loved golf. He was not that good. He was a large man, but he enjoyed playing. He also loved cars. You know, the thinker that he was, he should have invented the golf cart. Mixing golf and cars would have suited his fancy perfectly. Taft did have a vision of federal activism, just a quieter and narrower one. Taft has real doubts about some of the exercises of executive power that Theodore Roosevelt had engaged in conservation and in foreign policy. When the Teddy Roosevelt appointed head of the Bureau of Forestry publicly criticized Taft for not being a strong enough conservationist, William Taft promptly fired him. The move was applauded by party conservatives. During Roosevelt's administration, the conservatives within the party really had felt bullied and ignored. So now, when Taft comes in, Taft does not want to pick a fight with the conservatives. And time again, he compromises with them. So it sets up this battle within the Republican Party between the conservatives and the progressives, who are now increasingly alienated by Taft. Taft tried to placate progressives by pursuing antitrust lawsuits, but ended up widening the rift when he went after the gigantic U.S. Steel Trust. Steel was actually one of the few trusts that Theodore Roosevelt thought was beneficial to the country. The fact that Taft now was going after the Steel Trust, this made Roosevelt furious. Teddy Roosevelt was furious with Taft. And thus really starts the big riff and, sour grapes, so to speak, in their relationship, their friendship. So now Taft and Roosevelt are really not friendly anymore, especially on Roosevelt's end of things. So Roosevelt decides he's going to run against Taft in the 1912 election, as we covered in Roosevelt's videos. Roosevelt creates his own third party when the Republicans give the Republican nomination to William Taft for the 1912 campaign. And, so Roosevelt creates his own party, and the fact that Roosevelt got such a high percentage of popular vote as a third-party candidate, I believe, I don't remember off the top of my head, but I believe it was something like 27% of the popular vote as a third-party candidate. That pretty much ruined William Taft's chance of being reelected in 1912. It basically just split the Republican Party. So Woodrow Wilson in the 1912 election, he won pretty handedly. It was probably somewhat of a fluke, but, it definitely, Roosevelt played a huge role, in Taft not becoming reelected for a second term. So a little more about the Taft presidency. Despite his pledge, Taft lacked Roosevelt's expansive view of presidential power, as well as his charisma as a leader and his physical vigor. Always heavy, Taft weighed as much as 300 pounds at times during his presidency. Though he was initially active in trust busting, initiating some 80 antitrust suits against large industrial combinations, twice as many as Roosevelt, I might add, he later backed away from these efforts. And in general, he aligned himself with the more conservative members of the Republican Party. In 1909, Taft's convention of a special session of Congress to debate tariff reform legislation spurred the Republican protectionist majority to action and led to passage of the Payne-Aldrich Act, which did little to lower tariffs. Though more progressive Republicans, such as Roosevelt, expected Taft to veto the bill, he signed it into law, and he publicly defended it as the best tariff bill that the Republican Party ever passed. Yep, the Payne-Aldrich Act. Roosevelt and many other progressive Republicans, I should say, they thought that he was going to veto that. He didn't. And they were not happy about that at all, the progressives in the Republican Party. In another key misstep where progressives were concerned, Taft upheld the policies of Secretary of the Interior Richard Ballinger and dismissed Ballinger's leading critic, Gifford Pinchot, a conservationist and close friend of Roosevelt who served as head of the Bureau of Forestry. Pinchot's firing split the Republican Party further and estranged Taft from Roosevelt for good. Often overlooked in the record of Taft's presidency were his achievements, including his trust-busting efforts, his empowering of the Interstate Commerce Commission, the ICC, to set railroad rates, and his support of constitutional amendments mandating a federal income tax and the direct election of senators by the people, as opposed to appointment by state legislatures. So there were some good things that Taft did, but again, often overlooked. As I just said, he was not exactly somebody that's remembered for having a wonderful presidency, or really a very, if you want to call it, memorable presidency. What people and historians really remember most about Taft's presidency was the fact that Roosevelt's the one that worked hard to get him in there as his successor, and then Roosevelt didn't like what Taft was doing, so basically turned on Taft and caused him not to be reelected for a second term. That's really what people remember about the Taft presidency overall. I mean, that's just the truth of the matter. So now we're going to get into there'll be some other, good synopsis and overview, but we're going to get into some fun facts about Taft and his presidency. All right, some fun facts about Taft. He had a habit of nodding off. We've all noticed public figures looking sleepy at the State of the Union, but William Taft would literally fall asleep. President Taft was famously seen snoozing at parties, operas, funerals, and even church. So, pretty funny stuff there. When Taft lost the presidency to Woodrow Wilson in 1912, it was actually the worst defeat suffered by an incumbent president. He got only 8 electoral votes. That was it. As I said earlier, Taft is the only president to also join the Supreme Court. He was Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the nation's 10th, from 1921 to 1930. As I said, at Yale, he was a member of the secret society Skull and Bones, which was co-founded by his father. He was actually, his religion, he was a Unitarian, which is kind of interesting. You know, most presidents, are Catholic. I mean, there's only been a couple Catholic presidents, but, whatever it is, Protestant or Christian or, Methodist or whatever it is. Unitarianism. So look it up if you don't know what that is. Interesting stuff. Taft was just shy of 6 feet tall. During his presidency, his weight peaked at about 340 pounds. And after he left office, he actually lost 80 pounds. This one says he lost 70 pounds after leaving the White House, but he was 350 pounds. Taft is the largest U.S. president to date. And after his tenure at the White House, he gave up bread, potatoes, pork, and liquor to shed 70 to 80 pounds. Crazy, crazy. William Taft's weight was always an issue. At Yale, his nickname was the Big Lub. But he was also an accomplished wrestler, as I touched on in part 1. When he traveled to the Panama Canal by ship, the captain of the USS North Carolina requested an oversized bathtub for him. We're going to get into the bathtub thing here in a minute, too. I know I'm sure some of you are wondering about that. This is really cool. This is one of the facts that I loved, and I had mentioned this in our video opening. As Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, William Howard Taft had the unique distinction of swearing in Presidents Calvin Coolidge and Herbert Hoover, which was a first for a former president. Pretty cool stuff. 2 states were admitted to the Union during his presidency, New Mexico and Arizona. Very cool. President Taft, he appointed 6 justices to the Supreme Court, the same as appointed by Andrew Jackson and Abraham Lincoln, and just shy of George Washington and Franklin Roosevelt. So Taft appointed quite a few, 6 of them. He was a Republican, Taft, succeeding Teddy Roosevelt. Of course, as I said, they were once friends, but became fierce political enemies. He came from a prominent political family in Cincinnati. They did have ties to Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Utah. The current governor of Rhode Island, Lincoln Chafee, is a Taft family descendant. So I didn't even know that until I was actually doing, a little research on Taft. Pretty cool stuff. Had no idea that Lincoln Chafee is a descendant of William Howard Taft. Now, he is not the governor anymore. I take that back. Current governor, he's not. He was in office. He was governor of Rhode Island from 2011 to 2015. So he is no longer governor, but former governor, I should say, Lincoln Chafee. He is actually a Taft descendant, which is very cool. Taft died on March 8th. We'll get into that in 1930. 5 weeks after retiring from the Supreme Court is when he died. He is the first president and the only other president other than JFK to be buried at Arlington National Cemetery, as we know. And we're going to get into all that, of course. What else can I tell you here? Taft was a big guy. He was a heavyweight wrestling champ at Yale, for starters. He stood about 6 feet tall and weighed 243 pounds when he graduated from college. He struggled with his weight and may have weighed more than 330 pounds as president, but he was at his college weight at the time of his death. Big guy. He was a big man. I mean, besides being, heavy set, he was, tall, 6 foot tall, very just large man. William Howard Taft eventually held his own father's job in the cabinet. Alphonso Taft was briefly Secretary of War in 1876. His son, William Howard Taft, of course, was Teddy Roosevelt's Secretary of War after leaving the Philippines. Taft and James Monroe were the only 2 presidents to serve as Secretary of War. So, fun fact there. If anybody ever asks you, who are the 2 presidents that were former Secretaries of War? James Monroe and William Howard Taft. Pretty cool. Of course, as I mentioned, the Taft presidency did not end well. For starters, Taft became his own man and veered away from Roosevelt's policies, which alienated Roosevelt and led to the bitterly fought 1912 election in which Roosevelt ran as a third-party candidate. Historians give Taft mixed marks overall as a chief executive. So, again, I wouldn't say Taft was horrible. I would just say Taft is definitely probably right in the middle. C minus kind of tier. Taft actually went back to the law and finally joined the Supreme Court. After leaving the White House, William Howard Taft taught at Yale Law School until he was named by President Warren Harding to the Supreme Court in 1921. He was Chief Justice until he retired shortly before his death at the age of 72 in 1930. After joining the court, Taft reportedly wrote that, "I don't remember that I ever was president." Pretty crazy, right? What's some other fun facts here? Oh, Taft was the first president to own a car. He actually converted the White House stables into a garage. Thought that was pretty fun. First to own a car, William Howard Taft. Taft was the last president to keep a cow at the White House to provide fresh milk. Her name was Pauline. Love that. Thought that was really cool. Taft successfully argued for the construction of the U.S. Supreme Court building. He felt that the Supreme Court should distance itself from Congress, since it was a separate branch of the government. Prior to this, the Supreme Court heard cases in the Capitol building. Another really cool thing that Taft was obviously gets credit for. As I said, at over 330 pounds, Taft was the heaviest president. Here's once he got stuck in the White House bathtub and required 6 aides to pull him free. After that, the tub was replaced with a new one large enough to hold 4 men. We're going to get into this, though, because not necessarily true, I don't believe. Taft was the first president to be buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Obviously, JFK is the only other president to be buried there. And as I just said, Taft was the only president to ever serve as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, making him the only person to ever hold a position in both the executive and judicial branches of the United States government. Taft considered his time as Chief Justice to be the highest point of his career. As I said, he once wrote, "I don't remember that I ever even was president." And I told you he was the only former president to ever swear in incoming presidents. Chief Justice, he swore in the oath of office to Calvin Coolidge in 1925 and Herbert Hoover in 1929. Very cool stuff. He was actually the last president to rock facial hair while in office. Between the Lincoln and Taft administrations, all but 2 commanders-in-chief boasted some sort of face fuzz. But since our 27th president left the White House in 1913, clean-shaven candidates have monopolized the job. He was the last one to rock a stash. So he didn't have a full beard, but he had that mustache, and he was the last one to have any sort of facial hair, which I found pretty cool and interesting. What else here? We're going to get into that in a second. Oh, this is fun. A dairy expo once spent 2 days fretting over his missing milk cow. Pauline Wayne was quite the bovine beauty. A gift from Wisconsin Senator Isaac Stevenson, this purebred cow produced roughly 8 gallons of daily milk for the first family. Sensing a crowd pleaser, the 1911 International Dairymen's Exposition arranged to transport her all the way from Washington, D.C. to Milwaukee. But Pauline's train car wound up getting lost en route. After some frenzied telegraphing, the president's cow was discovered 2 days later in a Chicago stockyard, where she just barely avoided getting slaughtered. Imagine? So Pauline was missing. I mean, crazy stuff. Funny stuff, actually. I already touched on this a few times. He was the first. He valued being on the Supreme Court over his presidency. He's best remembered for his one-term stint on Pennsylvania Avenue, but he had the pining for the judicial branch since 1889. And then, of course, he obviously fulfilled that lifelong dream of his of the Supreme Court. So, pretty cool. Taft's wife, she crashed the 1912 Democratic National Convention to shield him from ridicule. It's hard to demean someone whose spouse is sitting right in front of you. After her husband won the Republican presidential nomination, First Lady Helen Herron, Nellie Taft, made a beeline for the Democratic National Convention in Baltimore. Grabbing a front row seat, she stared down orator after orator, including the cantankerous William Jennings Bryan of Nebraska, who suddenly decided to soften his anti-Taft rhetoric. Pretty cool, right? I mean, I thought that was fun. She crashed the convention to make sure they weren't bad-mouthing Bill Taft. Love it. His nicknames included Big Bill and Big Lub. For the record, Nellie, his wife, called him Sleeping Beauty due to Taft's bad habit of dozing off at parties, which pretty funny. But his nicknames were Big Bill and Big Lub. What else here? I already told you he worked briefly as a part-time reporter. He covered courthouse news for the Cincinnati Commercial while making ends meet as a law student. However, after becoming president, his attitude towards journalists cooled considerably. He wasn't a big fan of journalists once he became commander-in-chief. We know about he lost the weight after leaving the White House. I can truthfully say that I never felt any younger in all my life, Taft announced, having given up bread, potatoes, pork, and liquor. Too much flesh is bad for any man, Taft said. Here's a very cool thing. I did not know this. You know about teddy bears, but what about billy possums? Ever been to a build an opossum workshop? Well, neither have we. Worried that America's teddy bear mania would evaporate after Roosevelt's last term, toy manufacturers started producing stuffed billy possums, named in President-elect Taft's honor en masse. Needless to say, these things did not last too long. Billy possums, imagine? Like, who would think that the teddy bear could be replaced by a possum? Odd. I already told you this, but he tended to fall asleep at public functions. Most of the time, admitted Indiana Senator James Watson, Taft simply did not and could not function in alert fashion. Often while I was talking to him after a meal, his head would fall over on his breast and he would go sound asleep for 10 or 15 minutes. He would waken and resume the conversation only to repeat the performance in the course of half an hour or so. President Taft was also seen snoozing at operas, funerals, and especially church services. That is pretty funny. I mean, that he would fall asleep mid-conversation. I told you he successfully lobbied for the modern Supreme Court building. Before 1935, the Supreme Court issued its rulings from various rooms inside the Capitol. Chief Justice Taft changed all that successfully lobbying Congress to give the court its own separate building at a cost of $10 million. Taft, he became one of the Washington Nationals baseball team's racing mascots. Since 2006, wonky caricatures of George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, and Teddy Roosevelt have been sprinting across the Nats' home field and into the hearts of DC sports fans. These Rushmore racers were given some awfully big competition when Taft was added to the roster in 2013. He might even give Teddy a run for his money, said National COO Andy Pfeffer. Pretty fun. Like that. So, okay, here we go. We're going to get into the bathtub incident real quick. Taft once had an embarrassing bathtub incident. No, not that one. Taft, most people remember Taft as the president who got stuck in a bathtub while in office. The actual evidence behind this particular washroom anecdote is rather murky, but at least one of Taft's bathing sessions ended in catastrophe. While entering a hotel tub in 1915, the ex-president apparently failed to take fluid displacement into account. A wave of Taft's dirty bathwater instantly poured out, seeped through the floor, and started dripping all over people's heads on the level beneath him. Though briefly humiliated, Taft made light of the situation. While looking out at the Atlantic Ocean shortly thereafter, he quipped, "I'll get a piece of that fenced in someday, and then I venture to say there won't be any overflow." I thought that was pretty funny. Now we're really going to get into his bathtub incident, so to speak. He didn't actually get stuck in the tub. No evidence can be found to support this legend. In fact, Taft requested an extra-large tub once elected. A Manhattan company specially crafted a 7-foot, 41-inch wide, 1-ton tub for Taft. Literally the largest solid porcelain tub ever made for an individual. He once got stuck in a White House bathtub and had to be pulled out by staff. Here's another little, excerpt about it. Taft wasn't stuck in the White House bathtub. Constitution Daily looked at the whole bathtub myth in detail back in 2012. Google Constitution Daily about this, and you'll read. While Taft was a big guy, he had a special tub put in the White House before he became president. The myth started decades later, but despite his distinguished career, some people best remember Taft because of the bathtub myth. But it's not really true. From everything that I've read, the bathtub getting stuck in the tub, sorry, just a rumor, not true. Here's something that's near and dear to my heart, and I love it. William Howard Taft was the first president to throw an opening pitch. In 1910, Walter Johnson managed to catch a ball Taft threw from the stands at the beginning of a Washington Senators game, and this began an opening day tradition that still stands today. The game was in 1910. It was between the Washington Senators and the Philadelphia Athletics, and the Senators won the game 3-0. Hall of Famer Walter Johnson managed to snag a low-flying ball Taft gracelessly lobbed from the stands at the start of the 1910 Washington Senators game. 104 years later, this opening day tradition is still going strong. That was obviously written years ago, so it's more like, about 120 years later now. Still a tradition that stands today. He was the first president to throw out the opening pitch at a ball game. I love it. So here's just a little bit about his post-presidency and Supreme Court career. By 1912, Teddy Roosevelt was so incensed with Taft and the conservative Republicans that he chose to break from the party and form his own progressive party, also known as the Bull Moose Party. In the general election that year, the divide among Republicans handed the White House to the progressive Democrat Woodrow Wilson, who received 435 electoral votes to Roosevelt's 88. Taft received only 8 electoral votes, reflecting the repudiation of his administration's policies in the wave of progressive spirit that was then sweeping the nation. Undoubtedly relieved to be leaving the White House, Taft took a position teaching constitutional law at Yale University Law School. In 1921, President Warren Harding fulfilled Taft's lifelong dream by appointing him Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. In that post, Taft improved the organization and efficiency of the nation's highest court and helped secure passage of the Judges Act of 1925, which gave the court greater discretion in choosing its cases. He wrote some 250 decisions, most reflecting his conservative ideology. Taft's most prominent opinion came in Myers versus the United States in 1926, which invalidated tenure of office acts limiting the president's authority to remove federal officials. President Andrew Johnson's violation of a similar act had led to his impeachment by the House of Representatives in 1868. Taft remained Chief Justice until shortly before his death on March 8th of 1930 from complications of heart disease. So now we are going to get into the death and the burial and the gravesite of William Howard Taft. And of course, we're going to be reading from the book The President is Dead by Louis Bacot. So, here we go. Reading from The President is Dead by Louis Bacot. After retiring from the presidency, a position he never really wanted, William Howard Taft was able to secure the job he had always dreamed of, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Perhaps best known as the president who got stuck in the White House bathtub, the rotund Taft battled weight problems throughout his life. He tried to stay in shape by walking 3 to 4 miles each day, but eventually his girth caught up with him and he developed myocarditis, a heart condition caused by a hardening of the arteries. On January 6th of 1930, on the advice of his physician and personal friend, Dr. Francis R. Hagner, Taft took a leave of absence from the Supreme Court. He checked into Garfield Hospital in Washington, D.C., where he stayed for 8 days. On January 14th, Taft was released and went south to Asheville, North Carolina, to recuperate. At first, a recovery seemed promising, but when it was disclosed that he was taking brisk walks as well as long rides in the country about Asheville. However, after the temporary recovery, his health began to decline. On February 3rd, Taft came to the painful realization that he could no longer fulfill his judicial duties and officially retired from the Supreme Court. The next day, he returned to his home in Washington, D.C. Those who picked him up at the station were saddened by his frail and weakened appearance. At his home, photographers captured the pathetic sight of the once robust Taft being carried by men on either side. The blinds were shut, and policemen were stationed out front to allow Taft to rest peacefully and dissuade the morbidly curious. Undeterred newsmen camped out a few doors down in a death watch. It was not a question of if his death was imminent, but when. In Taft's home, Dr. Hagner monitored his health, and after a few days, he found it was improving. On February 9th, it was reported that Taft was able to maintain a normal conversation and recognize people around him. He had difficulty eating anything except broth, and the lack of solid food weakened his condition. During the following weeks, he received few visitors, but made an exception to see President Hoover on February 5th and March 1st. Toward the end of February, he appeared to make a slight recovery, but on February 26th, he took a turn for the worse. Fortunately, he was not in pain and appeared serene when conscious. On March 8th, at 4:45 p.m., as Taft lay in his bedroom, he slipped into a coma. What he said before he lost consciousness was not recorded, leaving his last words lost to history. William Howard Taft died half an hour later at 5:15 p.m. on March 8th of 1930. With Taft when he died were his wife Helen, a nurse, and Dr. H.G. Fuller. Dr. Hagner arrived a moment after his passing. In an uncanny coincidence, 5 hours earlier, another of the 9 Supreme Court Associate Justices had also died, Edward Terry Sanford. For the second time in 6 years, a former president had died in his home in Washington, D.C., permitting the current president to be one of the first to visit the family. When President Hoover heard the news, he summoned a car to take him and his wife to console Taft's widow, Helen. He offered his condolences as well as the East Room of the White House for the funeral. However, like Edith Wilson, Helen declined the gesture. Taft himself had said he wanted the funeral at All Souls Unitarian Church, and she intended to carry out his wishes. Still, President Hoover wanted to help in any way possible and assigned his aide, Colonel Campbell B. Hodges, to assist with the funeral arrangements. The body was prepared and dressed in Taft's judicial robes. The day after his death, the family visited Arlington National Cemetery to choose a burial location, and they were accompanied by Colonel Hodges and Colonel Charles G. Mortimer, the officer in charge at Arlington. They chose a sparsely used area on a wooded slope near the Fort Myer Gate. On March 11th at 9 a.m., the coffin was carried from the house and placed in a horse-drawn caisson. So there you have it. Then there was obviously the funeral. It took place at All Souls Church in Washington, D.C. You're probably seeing photos here of All Souls Church in Washington, D.C. on the screen. That was his wishes, of course. So, yeah, pretty interesting stuff. Now, there was a procession to Arlington National Cemetery. There actually was a temporary marker placed at the grave a month later after his funeral. And military guards were posted to deter souvenir hunters and vandals. Taft's widow commissioned sculptor James Earl Fraser to create a permanent memorial. He used Stony Creek granite to create an impressive 14.5-foot tall shaft, which was erected in 1932. It included a simple inscription: William Howard Taft, 1857 to 1930, President of the United States, Chief Justice of the United States. As with Benjamin Harrison's gravestone, many found the marker's subdued strength and dignity mirrored the man. A reporter for the Southeast Missourian wrote, "Simplicity is to be the dominant characteristic of the marker," with an inscription telling in unaccented language of the greatness of the one who lies beneath. So now his death sites, his home where he died, that is right in Washington. The 3-story white brick home where Taft died, it was built in 1904. It was actually being used in the 50s as the Syrian embassy, making Taft's death site the first ever owned by a foreign entity. So pretty interesting stuff. The home is actually located at 2215 Wyoming Avenue in Washington, D.C. I've never been there, so the pictures you're seeing on your screen of the home where he died, those are all stock photos that I found. I have not been to see the home. I've been in Washington, can't tell you how many times, but never have gone to see the home. And then, of course, Arlington National Cemetery. Taft's grave is located in Arlington National Cemetery in Section 30, Lot S14. He was the first president to be buried in one of our nation's most storied cemeteries, but he is not the only one. 33 years after Taft, John F. Kennedy joined him in the hallowed grounds. Kennedy's grave is the most visited site in the cemetery, while sadly, the tour bus does not even pause at William Taft's grave. So yes, Arlington National Cemetery in Arlington, Virginia, probably the most famous grave cemetery in the country. Maybe that, or maybe one of the Hollywood Cemetery out there in California. But Arlington's one of the most popular and most famous. That is where William Howard Taft's gravesite is. You're seeing pictures here on your screen. Hopefully you're seeing some really cool 3D photo effects of his gravesite on these pictures, as you'll notice. It's cool. It's a nice gravesite. But yes, it is. If you ask people, if you quiz people, who are the presidents buried in Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia, they will all tell you, or most people will tell you, John F. Kennedy. Almost none of them will be able to tell you that William Howard Taft is also buried there. But he is. And to be honest, he's only about maybe 100 yards down the hill from John F. Kennedy's gravesite. They're not overly far apart. Probably about 100 yards or so apart, roughly. So, pretty interesting stuff. So there you go. That is the life, legacy, and presidency of our 27th President of the United States, William Howard Taft, also Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. I hope you enjoyed this installment of our presidential series. Again, I thank you so much for all the support, everything that you guys do. Please leave those comments and questions coming. We love them. Love to talk to you guys. Next week, we will be getting into the 28th President of the United States, a man with some New Jersey ties, Woodrow Wilson. So stay tuned for that. Henry will be joining me for that, most likely. I'm pretty sure he will. And we'll go from there. Again, thanks, guys, so much. Hope you enjoyed this. Leave those comments and questions. Anything. If I messed up on anything, call me out on it. Seriously, I'm here to improve, and you guys are my audience. So if there's something that I was incorrect or messed up on, let me know. Or just leave me some questions and comments. I love those too, of course. Appreciate it, guys. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye now.